Student loans have become a moving target. Public service loan forgiveness, the SAVE program, income driven repayment plans. It feels like everything is changing. We don't know what's available, what the fine print says, or what the new rules are. Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm a fellow confused PA and host of this channel, The Medicine Couch. Well, today I'm joined by some guests that are going to help clear up our confusion. One is Kristin Burton, who's a fellow PA and founder of Millionaires in Medicine. And also joining us is one of her teammates, Kaitlin Hile. Together, we're going to talk about what's going on right now and talk about the smartest moves you can make with your student loans. Hi, Kristin and Kaitlin. Thank you so much for joining me today. And Kristin, we'll start with you. For those who may not know you, can you share a little bit about your background as a PA and what started you teaching other clinicians about money?
I started Millionaires in Medicine back in 2018. I've been a PA for almost 10 years. I've spent almost my whole career in the hospital in a combination of cardiology and critical care medicine. And really early on, I recognized that as little as I understood about money, as overwhelmed as I was about my student loan debt, most other PAs, NPs, pharmacists were exactly the same.
And Caitlin, you are a pharmacist, correct?
Yes, I work
Yeah.
in cardiology in the inpatient setting as a pharmacist, and then really got interested in student loans from my own personal situation of both my husband and I are both clinical pharmacists. We both graduated with student loan debt, so we knew like we needed a plan to be able to be successful despite both graduating with a significant loan burden.
It's not easy. I mean, I came out with $154,000 worth of student loan debt. Now, I've gotten a good portion of it paid off, but it is, I still have a big portion left, and it's really confusing about what's going on right now. But before we get into that, Kristen, you have built this whole program around financial literacy for PAs and NPs. Why do you think this topic, especially student loans, resonates so strongly with clinicians right now?
Well, when you look at burnout rates in general in medicine, they have skyrocketed post COVID. And there's actually a lot of data saying that financial stress is a big driver of burnout. So, for a lot of us feeling a just professional dissatisfaction, we may or may not recognize that money stress actually may be at the core of it. Now, I talk about money in all facets, and actually, my favorite thing to talk about is investing and wealth building. But for almost all medical professionals, they feel this big barrier to that because their student loan debt is so overwhelming, so mentally consuming, and the actual cash flow that goes out every month to pay for it feels
Yeah.
like the thing that stands between them and doing anything else with money. So this is always front of mind.
And I hear a lot of PAs and NPs talk, and I see them say a lot that they are so frustrated. They make a good salary, but they always still feel broke. Why do you think so many people in medicine struggle with money, even with solid incomes?
Part of it is really through no fault of any of us, right? Wages for most medical professionals have maybe paced or lagged behind inflation in recent years. The student loan debt has now the added layer of confusion and complexity on top of just existing. And we've seen a big shift in housing affordability. Those things combined have created a sort of stressful money situation. Now, I'm of the very firm core belief that almost all PAs, NPs, and pharmacists can win with money. And by win with money, I mean actually become multimillionaires on their current income with the right strategy. So it's definitely possible, but there are certain cards that have been stacked not in our favor of late.
And we're not stupid people, obviously, right? I
Right.
mean, we have advanced degrees, we have the ability to learn things, but it's just, our focus has been elsewhere. And so money takes a little bit of education itself, right? It's not something we're just born knowing how to do. And so I can see it can be one of those things that we kind of know a little bit about, but we put it on the back burner,
Right.
right? One of the age old debates that I see out there all the time that people struggle with is paying off their student loans. Like, should they throw every extra dollar at their student loans to pay them off quickly, or take other money and start investing it early to build that nest egg? And that's sometimes a hard thing for people to figure out the difference because I've heard arguments on both sides. What do you think about that, and how do you help clinicians kind of think through that decision?
Let me tell you a quick story about this gal I know named Kristin, who decided to rapidly fire pay off student loan debt. I did that. I did every single dollar to the student loan debt. My husband and I lived on $35,000 a year. I worked 4 per diem jobs plus my full-time,
Wow.
80 hours a week, paid off $161,000 in 16 months. And so I've done that. I've been there. The benefit, of course, is that you reclaim your cash flow every month towards something else. But the downside, and it is a massive downside, is that you actually have a huge opportunity cost that comes in the form of missed investing years. I did not recognize this because I didn't know anything about wealth building when I did it. And that's the problem with most medical professionals pursuing this path. Most of them have never sat down and actually looked at what do I need to be doing from an investing standpoint and how much is it costing me to be missing out? Just for example, I did that in a really short period of time, 16 months. The 2 years of missed Roth IRA contributions from just me and my husband for 2 years because we were so young, we're in our late 20s, was over $500,000 of lost
Mm.
future tax-free money from that 16-month decision. So you can see how
Uh,
that plays out to be huge if you're doing that over really long periods of time.
if you can invest and get, I assume, a higher return on your money than the rate of the student loan interest, then it's smarter to do the investment than just pay off the loans. But I'm sure there's a lot of psychological stuff there as well. A lot of people, don't can't handle the debt sitting there. But do you think part of that though is probably because they just don't feel in control of their money because they don't understand it a lot?
Actually, there was a really interesting study that I read on this exact topic where people that were struggling with anxiety and depression that had debt, it didn't specify debt, student loan debt, but they had debt. They actually took them, changed absolutely nothing about the total amount of debt they owed. All they did was implement a debt strategy so that the person felt like I'm in control. I know what I'm doing with this. And they had statistically less symptoms of anxiety and depression just by having a plan.
That's amazing, and I think it's, something that people need to really hear is that your problems don't go away if you ignore them or you just kind of,
True.
do the bare minimum, but if you understand what's going on and just learn a little bit
Yep.
and make a plan, like you're saying, even just that helps people get control. But today, specifically, we're gonna start talking or wanna dive into student loans specifically because there's a lot kind of up in the air right now, right? Or at least there's a lot of confusion that's been going on. So, Kaitlin, let's kind of turn to you. There's a lot of drama going on right now about like the income driven repayment plans and the different programs that are out there. Can you kind of give us a kind of a quick rundown to explain the different plans and, kind of what's been happening and changing with those?
Yes, so I'll start by saying that income driven repayment or IDR, that's an umbrella term for all of the different income driven repayment plans. I talk with a lot of people and they're like, I'm on the IDR plan. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of different options. And so that's a big umbrella term. Inside that income driven repayment umbrella, we have the SAVE plan, which a lot of people are familiar with from headlines and seeing that in the news more. There's the pay plan, there's income-based or repayment or IBR, and then there's the ICR or income contingent repayment. We're not going to talk about that a whole lot. For most people, it's one of the more expensive pathways, and so I don't want to spend too much time on that pathway. Now, some of the changes that have been happening. So the SAVE plan is what has gotten the most attention, right? For the majority of borrowers, that the SAVE plan generated the lowest monthly payment for people. And so a lot of people were on the SAVE plan. Well, then we had a new administration come into office who was not as favorable towards the SAVE plan and went to kind of dismantle that. So there were several states that filed lawsuits at the same time about different aspects of the SAVE plan. And so the courts filed an injunction and paused the SAVE plan. That's really what started like mass chaos of people having no idea what was going on. The communication from the student loan servicers was terrible because they also didn't know what was going on. And so really there was like no clear source of information for quite some time. We've fast forwarded and now the SAVE plan is still in forbearance. However, interest is accruing. So what that means is like you don't technically have to make a payment right now if you're on the SAVE plan, but your balance is growing day after day as interest accrues. And so
Yeah, and that just started the interest just started back up, right? Like a month ago or
exactly.
so,
That
or
was
just
August 1st. And so
okay.
it's a pretty recent change. It did make, national news in some regards. So I think most borrowers are at least aware that interest is accruing. But we've seen a lot of analysis paralysis where people are like, yeah, I know I need to get off of Save, but I just don't know what the other options are. Some other changes that are going on is the pay plan is going to be phased out within the next 2 years. So it's still available to you, but it does have an expiration date of June 30th of 2028. And then they're developing a new plan that was part of the big beautiful bill. It's called the RAP plan, or repayment assistance. That plan will become available this coming summer of 2026.
Okay, and then the one that you said that is ending in a couple of years, do people like the people that are on it right now, that will end for those people as well, or it'll just end
Mhm.
as far as new people can't sign on to it?
Will end for everybody. And so if you're in the pay plan on that expiration date, you'll be automatically rolled into the RAP plan, or repayment assistance, which may or may not be the best option for people. And so they're definitely going to want to do some research, learn this information so they can make a really well-informed decision about what plan they want to pivot into when the time comes.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit, if we can, about what things to think about when you're looking at each one. But first, I want to kind of get back to the save plan because a lot of people are confused, myself included, about whether I should jump ship on that now and change things over or wait and see what the rulings are going to be. I don't imagine they would be in the favor of the SAVE plan because I don't, this administration is definitely not for it. But do you have any thoughts or advice on that?
I agree with you that we could wait for the court ruling, but I think we all see the writing on the wall. And even if somehow the courts shook us all and said, we're going to let the SAVE plan continue to exist, it will also expire in June 30th of 2028. That's not going to happen either way, though. The courts are going to strike that down. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think it's like less than a 1% chance of that continuing to exist. We need to pivot to see what would be like the next best plan for me. And then we're really looking at what are the other income driven repayment plans and figuring out what payment might make the most sense. I will say there's one group of people that I'm like, it probably makes sense for you to stay on Save Forbearance a little bit longer. And that's anybody paying off high interest rate debt. So if you're somebody tackling your credit card debt, then it makes sense to say, well, I'm going to let my 6% federal student loan accrue interest, and I'm going to dump every single dollar that I can towards my 22% interest rate credit card debt.
Right.
That mathematically, that makes a lot of sense. But you got to do it on like a timeline, right? You need to have a written plan of how are you going to pay off that credit card debt. So maybe it's like for the next 3 months, I'm going to stay on Save Forbearance and I'm going to just go hard on that credit card debt and knock it out. And then after those 3 months, I'm going to get off of the Save plan and have a real student loan
Yeah.
strategy.
Can we just zoom out for a quick second? I just want to make sure
Mhm.
we address towards the beginning, like who should even be on an income-driven repayment plan? Because we're kind of getting into the weeds on what the different ones are and how they're calculated. But before we go there, like, are these
Sure.
even the best move in general? Who should be on a standard or even an accelerated path?
That is a really, really good question. I think the first thing to do is look at what is your debt to income ratio. And if you're not familiar with what that is, you basically add up all of your student loan debt and divide it by your income, and that gives you your debt to income ratio. So if you have $200,000 in federal student loan debt, you earn $100,000 a year, your debt to income ratio is 2 to 1. Anybody with a debt to income ratio less than 1, you probably won't benefit much from programs like public service loan forgiveness or taxable loan forgiveness. For those people, a standard repayment or perhaps an accelerated repayment may make the most sense. If you have a debt to income ratio of 2 to 1, 3 to 1, we've seen 4 to 1 and 5 to 1. Those people, you really need to start thinking in depth about forgiveness programs like PSLF, NHSC scholarships, things like that, that can really be life-changing when you have that high debt to income ratio.
And I just want to nail this coffin down because I think that this is like something that gets missed very, very often. If you're on an income driven repayment plan and you have a qualifying employer, you're pursuing public
Mhm.
service loan forgiveness. At the end, your loans are forgiven tax free. If you do not have a qualifying employer, you're a private practice dermatology or whatever, you're doing taxable loan forgiveness. At the end of your term, your loans are forgiven. It is not tax free. That is called the tax bomb that people talk about. And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, taxable loan forgiveness has the highest total cost of student loan repayment when you factor in the tax bill compared to standard repayment, accelerated repayment, public service loan forgiveness. So make sure that before you start getting into the weeds on which of these plans am I going to choose, you should first ask yourself the question, what's my overarching student loan strategy? Should I even be on an income-driven plan, or is
Mhm.
that in and of itself the wrong move?
Yeah, I think a lot of people just see a lower monthly payment and they're like, "Yeah, I'll take that one," without looking at the 30,000-foot view. And like you said, taxable loan forgiveness for the majority of people, it's the most expensive way that you could repay your loans. And the other scary thing is a lot of people don't understand that they're pursuing taxable loan forgiveness.
That's it.
They have no idea how much is going to be forgiven at the end of that 20 to 30-year time horizon. And so what would happen is, let's say you hit that taxable loan forgiveness threshold and you have $100,000 forgiven and you're like, "Woohoo, party." And then you go to file your taxes and they're like, "Well, you owe $30,000." And you're like,
What?
"What?"
Yeah,
I didn't even know.
yeah.
And
So
that might sound like a hypothetical, but it's happened to a lot of people.
So this is where you're talking about where people that thing where if you make a payment every month on your loans for 20 years, but if you're in like an income driven repayment, you're not actually paying it off. You're just making a payment every month. And then whatever is left after that, I think it's 20 years, right? Or it has been, then that gets forgiven. And that's what you're talking about, that part that gets forgiven is taxable. Is that what you're talking about? Or are we talking about
Exactly.
something
Yeah,
totally different?
yep.
Nope, you're spot on. The only nuance is the time frame, that 20 years. It depends on which income driven repayment plan you're on. So it's anywhere from 20 to 30 years depending on the plan.
Yeah, I would be in that camp that probably didn't think about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't know that structure, and so, like Caitlin mentioned, they're like, "Hey, this plan has a lower payment. I'm gonna roll with it," and, haven't necessarily run the big picture numbers, which I think that's, one of the first things anyone should do when evaluating student loan debt is go, "This path, this path, this path, this path, what's my total cost of repayment?" So that you have a really good idea, and if you notice, like, "Oh, public service loan forgiveness saves me $300,000," you might start asking yourself questions about if it's worth going out and finding a qualifying employer.
Yeah, and when you say run the numbers, people like me are like, I don't know how to run the numbers, but I think that are there some student loan calculators that from the government websites or something, or how do you suggest people run the numbers?
That is a very good question. I will say that's something we help a lot of people
Yeah.
with because it is complex. There are calculators available on the federal student aid website. They're not as simple as they probably should be. There's more confusion around them now because they're still in the process of updating what income driven repayment plans are available, and they don't quite yet have the wrap plan incorporated on there, so people aren't able to do those numbers. But I think a lot of it starts with just learning about what these plans are and what they look like. And then, we can show you how to run those calculations. But the calculators that are available on the federal student loan website, I think there's an opportunity for improvement
Yeah.
What
in
is the
those.
government?
Shocking,
It can't be
right?
simple. Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you don't wanna do any complex calculations, your first step is like, what's my debt to income ratio?
Right.
And if it's a high number, I can already tell you that PSLF would be a life-changing decision to make.
Well, let's talk about PSLF right now, just for people who may not really understand what it is.
So, Public Service Loan Forgiveness, or PSLF, is a program that if you work for a qualifying employer, which is a government employer or a 501(c)(3), aka a non for profit employer, then you are eligible for it. You need to just go in and fill out a form. You send it to your employer and they sign off like, yep, she works here full time, which is 30 hours or more according to the student loan website. And you make 120 qualifying payments. So if you're doing that consecutively, that's 10 years worth of qualifying payments. And then your remaining federal student loan balance is forgiven tax free at the end of that. So it's very exciting when it comes to fruition.
So if you paid your normal student loan payment, like you didn't get on any program and you just paid your normal student loan payment that they tell you that you have to
Mhm.
pay, I guess I thought that you would be paid off in 10 years anyway. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, for most people, the standard repayment is over 10 years. And
Okay.
so if you were doing PSLF and making that standard payment, you're probably right. It wouldn't be very helpful to you because you would have paid most of it off. The key is to be, you can be on an income driven repayment plan.
Okay.
So you're paying a lower amount and getting those qualifying payments that way.
Okay. And you don't have to stay with the same employer for 10 years. You can
Right.
change it. They just whoever you go to also has to be either a government or a nonprofit, correct?
Exactly. You can change employers as many times as you want. You can take a gap if you wanted to take a year-long sabbatical and stop getting qualifying payments for that year, you can do that. So they don't have to be 120 consecutive payments, and you can change your employer as many times as your heart desires, as long as they're all qualifying employers.
I think some people might think, well, that means I have to work like in an Indian reservation out in the middle of nowhere or things like that. But that's not true, right? I mean, there even in large cities, there's nonprofit places to work, correct?
Oh, yeah, and we're actually very lucky in healthcare. There are ample opportunities out there. The majority of academic medical centers are going to be non-for-profit. A lot of community hospitals are as well. And so, really, in any specialty that you're interested in, it is possible to find a PSLF qualifying job in just about any geographic area. So that's the beauty of healthcare. There's a lot of opportunities out there, whereas some other professions may not have quite as many qualifying employers.
But I saw with the changeover in administration, a lot of the things that have been happening lately, that a lot of people were concerned, either concerned that public service loan forgiveness wasn't going to continue or be available, or that something about their payments weren't being counted, their qualified payments, or they had finished the 10 years and were kind of in limbo. I can't set that question up better because I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
No, no,
Can you tell me what I'm
I'm
talking
with you.
about?
Yes, there has been a lot of anxiety around PSLF just with all of these ongoing changes and a lot of student loan limbo happening. Some of the confusion was the student loan servicers have been really slow at processing the applications
Yeah.
just with how chaotic things have been. So that stressed some people out, understandably so. The aspect that you mentioned about maybe my payments will increase. Well, the SAVE plan was a qualifying payment for PSLF, and now that's off the table. And so, with the other income driven repayment plans, your payment is probably going to be a little bit higher than it was on the SAVE plan, but it may still be a very advantageous route for you overall. So, that might have been some of what you were seeing as well. But
Okay.
so far, there's been no initiatives to take PSLF off the table. Even I think it was in his first term back in like 2017, if I have that year right. There was a proposal at that time to dismantle PSLF. And even in that proposal, which failed, by the way, in that proposal, they still grandfathered in anybody that was currently pursuing PSLF, and it would have only impacted new borrowers. So we feel pretty confident in the current landscape based off of all of the things I've been closely monitoring over the last 2 years.
When you work with PAs and NPs and pharmacists, what are some of the common mistakes that you see that people mishandle with their student loans?
Well, I think one of the big things I think Kristen already alluded to is they don't know what their student loan strategy is. They saw the lowest monthly payment available and clicked on it, and they haven't thought beyond that. And that can be a really expensive mistake over the long haul. I think another one is solely focusing on your student loan debt and missing the big financial plan. Yes, student loan strategy is incredibly important. That's why we're here today talking about it. But it's also just one piece of your financial plan. And I think a lot of people feel that overwhelm from student loan debt, focus solely on that, and then forget to think about building an emergency fund, investing to make sure they're able to retire the timeline that they want, and all of those other things that need to fit together and complete the puzzle.
So, talking more about public service loan forgiveness, is there something that a lot of clinicians seem to, the mistakes they make or pitfalls that they might fall into that they should watch out for?
Yeah, there's a laundry list here. So let me kind of tackle them one by one. First and foremost, you need to actually apply for it and you need to certify your employment annually. Make sure you're staying on top of the paperwork. It literally takes like 10 minutes a year. It's well worth it. Two is when you go to recertify your income for that income driven repayment plan, your goal is to make that payment as low as possible because you're getting tax free forgiveness at the end of these 10 years. So your goal is to legally, of course, pay as little as you can while you're getting those 120 qualifying payments. So there's a few tips and tricks on how you can lower that payment as much as possible. One is thinking about how you're proving your income when you submit that application. So if you're using your last filed tax return, they take into account any pre-tax investments that you're doing. So if you are maxing out that 401k with traditional 401k contributions, if you're making HSA or FSA contributions, you can drive down that monthly payment and you're getting ahead from an investing side as well. So that's a win-win. If you use the alternative form of income, that's using a pay stub from the last 90 days. Now, that does not take into account any investing that you're doing. And so, for most people, that's not the most advantageous strategy. And if you're doing PSLF, you want to be maximizing your traditional or pre tax contributions to decrease your payments as much as you possibly can. Now, notice I said pre tax contributions. I get asked all the time, well, I make Roth 401k contributions. Is that helping? No, it's great from an investing side of things, but it's not going to impact your student loan payment. The other thing to really keep in mind if you're married and doing PSLF is your tax filing status. If you're married and you file jointly, they will take into account both you and your spouse's income when they're determining your income driven repayment amount. Now, if you have, like myself, two pharmacists in the household, well, that makes a big difference, right? When you add another six-figure income in there, that payment goes up a lot. If you file your taxes separately and you're in an equitable distribution state, then they only look at your income. And so that single decision for us to file our taxes separately decreased my husband's monthly payment by like $700-800.
We've seen folks where just changing the tax filing status will change their total cost of repayment by 6 figures. I mean, this is
Mm-hmm.
not chump change. And so these little nuances where you think like, "Oh, does that really matter? Do I need to put a lot of effort into that?" Well, how much effort would you put into it if someone, like, offered to hand you a $100,000 check? Because in some
Yeah.
cases, that's really what this is.
So, another thing I hear people talk about all the time, and I've thought about it, is refinancing. It sounds great, especially for some of the graduate loans that have those higher interest rates. What do you think about refinancing, or what are things that people should consider when they're looking at refinancing?
So before you explore refinancing, I think the first step is to run the numbers of all of these different pathways and know what the impact of PSLF would be for you. If you've done that and you're like, it doesn't really make a difference for me, I don't really get anything forgiven, or it's a very small amount, then very reasonable to explore refinancing. So if that's you, you can check a variety of different lenders to see who's going to give me the best interest rate and the best loan terms overall. The big thing to keep in mind when you transition and you refinance your federal loans to private, you lose all of the federal borrower protections. Things like the opportunity to apply for an income driven repayment plan if your income were to decrease significantly. The fact that for federal student loans, if you become completely and totally disabled, those loans are discharged tax free. If you were to pass away, those federal loans are discharged tax free. That all goes away when you switch to private student loans. And so you need to make sure you have adequate insurance protections in place, especially if this is a large student loan balance. If you're going to take $100,000 in federal student loan debt and make it private, you at least need $100,000 in term life insurance so that if you were to pass away, your family members aren't left cleaning up the mess of how are we going to come up with $100,000 to repay this.
Another question that I've thought about before about public service loan forgiveness is when I was looking at different jobs, you've got this private position that's going to pay you maybe 20,000 more a year than what this either government or nonprofit job is going to pay, just as an example. And I'd think, well, it makes more sense probably just to go ahead and go for the private one with a higher salary and just put more money into my student loans and get that paid off faster. Well, what are your thoughts on that way of thinking, and anything else you have to say about that that can help people decide if that's the right route for them or not?
Actually, I think the absolute best way to do it is to actually calculate it out and figure out your break even point. That first requires you to know core question, how much money does PSLF save me compared to standard repayment? So let's just make it like very easy numbers. Let's say it saves you $100,000. Then you can look at the spread between the jobs. The spread might be small, like let's say, as you mentioned, like, $15,000-$20,000 difference between a nonprofit academic medical center and a private practice. So if you look at that, you'll say, okay, in approximately 5 years, ignoring taxes, I would break even where my extra income would begin to offset the student loan benefit that I would have had with PSLF. Now, sometimes that spread is way bigger. Like sometimes the question is, should I do locums and earn $100,000 more a year or save $40,000 with PSLF? And you can go, oh, my break even point is year one. This is an obvious decision. That's helpful, I think, to map it out that way. The other thing I would say is just because you got one offer at a qualifying employer that was lower comp doesn't mean that's going to cross the board truth. I just saw some data from Merit Health, which is a source of salary data for medical professionals, actually looking at the types of employers that have the most PAs that earn 200,000 and above, and government employers was actually ranked way up there, which
Ah,
really surprised me because you hear repeatedly, "Oh, the VA doesn't pay," but maybe that's not true.
Yeah,
yeah.
and from a pharmacy standpoint, the VA is actually notorious for paying very well.
Mm,
And they
mm.
also offer some additional student loan forgiveness options in addition to being a PSLF qualifying employer. So don't discount it. At least, do your due diligence, see what the offer is, and see what student loan programs you'd be eligible for, specifically through a place like the VA.
Yeah, so I'm still just a little bit confused with all the changes of what the options are on on the federal student loans. Can you kind of go through those and just give us a little overview and make it kind of compact so people kind of have it straight in their mind of what's available now?
It is a little bit of alphabet soup. So a lot of people are overwhelmed with these different options and what they mean and what the nuances are. I'll try to simplify it without getting too far in the weeds for everybody. So you're going to have the wrap plan available next year. The pay plan is currently available, but it will be expiring in summer of 2028. The income-based repayment, or IBR, will continue to be available, and then the ICR plan will also expire summer of 2028, and we're not going to talk about that one because it's usually not very advantageous. So let's talk first about the income-based repayment plan because that one's going to be sticking around long term. They are going to use a percentage of your discretionary income to calculate your payment. Now, the amount of your discretionary income that they use depends on when you first borrowed federal student loans. So they're going to classify you as either an old borrower or a new borrower. If you had a federal student loan balance on July 1st of 2014, you're considered an old borrower. That means that your monthly payment is 15% of discretionary income. If you did not have a federal student loan balance on July 1st of 2014, then you're considered a new borrower and you pay 10% of discretionary income.
It's always unfair to the old people.
I it's really not fair at all. And if you're somebody that you're like, gosh darn it, like I don't want to pay 15% of discretionary income, well, the pay plan could be a temporary breath of fresh air for you because that plan is 10% of discretionary income. You just couldn't have borrowed loans before 2007. So as long as you didn't borrow before then, you're eligible for pay. and you could get 10% of discretionary income payments at least until summer of 2028. So that's two years of lower payments, which could be nice. And then you could always go back to the old IBR after that. Now, the WRAP plan, this one's brand new coming next summer. They calculate the payments a little bit differently, and they're going to just use your adjusted gross income instead of your discretionary income. Now, without getting into the weeds about that, I will tell you that your adjusted gross income is always higher than your discretionary income. The WRAP plan, it depends on how high your AGI is, what percentage you pay of your AGI. So I'll tell you, it's from 1 to 10%. If your AGI is over $100,000, you pay 10% of your AGI. So this could be a really great tool for somebody maybe working part-time or like having an overall low income. But if you're doing locums work and you're like crushing it, making 250, 300K a year, you're going to be paying 10% of AGI. So most of our PAs, healthcare professionals, are going to fall into that 10% AGI group. So that's a little bit about the different plans without getting too far in the weeds, because we could certainly go down a rabbit hole here.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview just so people have an idea of what's out there. I think that we've kind of talked a lot about student loans and things. I'm just curious if somebody is coming out of school, a brand new graduate, what financial advice in general would you guys give to a new graduate coming out?
If you were going to end up a very successful, financially successful PA, and you're a brand new grad, the absolute best thing to do is sit down, create a full written money plan that has at least three categories. One, your investing plan, which requires you to know, am I somebody who wants to work full time until 65 or not? Two, your student loan strategy. So not just, hey, I'm going to be on WRAP, right? But like the true strategy, am I doing PSLF? Am I doing taxable loan forgiveness, etc.? And then the third thing I would say is make a plan for your cash needs. You will have more of them typically in the early years post graduation than later, because a lot of people have car replacement needs. They may or may not want to buy a house. They may have a wedding. They may have a honeymoon. All sorts of things come up. And so if you can create a plan that addresses all three pieces of that at the same time, you will be light years ahead of most people, because almost everyone without some intentional money um, advice or without some intentional education, they lean into figuring out, what am I going to do about my student loans on a surface level? And then how am I going to get the cash for this stuff? They skip
Mhm.
everything else, and everything else is the stuff that actually matters.
Yeah, I saw somebody looking for financial advice on Reddit about, hey, I'm a new PA and I just got this great job and they've got like a couple paychecks and they're like, I really want to get the car that I want. And everyone's saying, oh, I shouldn't get the car I want. But that's not even the question, is it? I mean, it's not whether to get the car or not. The question is, I'm getting from you, the question is really, have you thought about a plan? Do you have a plan, a
Yeah.
financial plan?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
gotta have the big picture, because most folks, when you get into medicine for more than 5 minutes, go, "Man, I don't know if I wanna do this for 45 years," or whatever it ends up being, and so, like, recognize early on that you might want to build some assets to give yourself some choice and some freedom so that you're not forced into working full-time for 4 decades if you choose not to.
Yeah, and it's nice as a new grad, you're well positioned to do this and do this very easily because you're used to living on like next to nothing, right?
Yep.
And so it's much easier to implement this system from day one versus later in life when you're like, gosh, I'm grown accustomed to spending XYZ a year. As a new grad, like you can really mold your financial plan to be exactly what you want it to be.
So what about the further into the career? You're talking to somebody who has been working for 5, 10 years and they still have a fair amount of student debt. They feel like they're living often paycheck to paycheck. What advice would you give to them? Like, where do they start?
In all honesty, if you are probably, I'll say mid-career, and you feel like, man, I haven't really gotten the traction that I wanted, I haven't done the investing I wanted yet, I still have student loan debt, I think there's this natural tendency to feel like I should probably attack my student loans because it feels like a tangible, achievable goal. But actually, mathematically, you probably need to table your student loans and you probably need to catch up on an investing plan, because as I say all the time, there are really no loans for you to feed yourself when you're 85. Like, you have to take care of that need, and your student loan debt is likely moderate interest rate debt that making the minimum payment on is gonna do very little long-term financial damage, but not having the core investments you need to actually care for yourself in retirement is truly a pressing need. And so if you're past that 10-year mark and you haven't crossed, multiple six figures in your investment portfolio yet, you're going to have to shift your focus over there and do some course correcting.
One thing we didn't mention earlier, Kristen, is that you have a YouTube channel, right? And
Yeah.
I've seen it. It's got some great videos on there. Can you tell us a little bit about that channel?
Yeah, it's actually our newest modality for sharing content. We're at Millionaires in Medicine on YouTube and on Instagram as well.
So if somebody is wanting to get a little bit more information, they can look at your YouTube channel. You've probably got
Sure.
videos on lots of different topics. And again, they're going to be focused on people in medicine, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Just like it's important to make smart financial moves, it's also important to make smart career moves. I've got a whole career series designed just for PAs and NPs. You can binge that playlist right here and start building the career that you actually want.